Welcome back to Blooming Curious, the podcast for parents and early years teachers who want to raise curious, capable kids from the very start. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're tackling the question that I get asked most often, and honestly, it's the question I asked myself the very first time I tried this. Can inquiry learning actually work in a real classroom, or will it just descend into chaos? If you've ever stood in front of a room with 25 little faces and thought there's absolutely no way I'm opening this can of worms up, this episode is for you. Hello and welcome to Blooming Curious, the podcast dedicated to reimagining early childhood education through the power of curiosity. I'm Edwina, your host, and here to explore the strategies that inspire a lifelong love for learning in children. So if you're homeschooling or you're a curious educator looking for creative, meaningful ways to engage children and move beyond the talk and chalk traditional classroom approach, then this is the place for you. Here's what I want you to know even before we get into it. The fear is real. The fear is valid, and the fear makes complete sense, because the first time you open up a lesson for genuine inquiry, it genuinely does feel like you're walking a tightrope. You've worked hard at creating a calm and productive classroom, and you know your routines. And then someone suggests that you hand over more of the thinking to the children. And suddenly your brain goes straight to climbing on tables, everyone talking at once, and absolutely nothing getting done. I get it. I have thought those same things. But here's what I've learned after years of being in a K-2 classroom. What teachers mostly imagine losing control looks like, and what actually happens when inquiry learning is structured well, keywords, are two very different things. So today, let's talk about that gap. When most teachers say they're afraid of losing control, what they're actually picturing is chaos, full-on noise, kids doing whatever they want, no learning happening, kids running around, maybe one chasing another with a ruler, and then you're standing in the middle of it, helpless. Do you get the picture? Well, that's not inquiry learning. That's the absence of structure. And those two things are not the same thing. Real inquiry learning, the kind that works in real classrooms with real children, still has clear expectations. It still has routines. It's still guided. The teacher is still very much in the room, paying attention and guiding the thinking. What does change is this. Instead of you doing all the talking and all the work, the children do more of the working and more of the thinking. Instead of you delivering the answer, you ask the question. And yes, it is noisier than a silent worksheet, but it's productive noise. It's the sound of children actually engaged, and it will give you such a warm and fuzzy feeling like you've never had before. And once you know this difference between productive and unproductive noise, you will never go back. Here's an example. In a traditional lesson, let's say on floating and sinking, you might explain the concept, demonstrate it, have children record the result. It's structured, it's predictable, it's controlled. In an inquiry version of this exact same lesson, you might put a bucket of water and a collection of objects on each table, and you might say to the children, what do you notice? What do you wonder? And yes, it's louder. Children will surprise you with where they go. But real learning is happening. And it's happening because they are genuinely curious about what they're discovering. That's not losing control. That's actually gaining something much more valuable. But I want to get practical because this is where it counts. Before you stick those buckets of water on the table, you need to first listen to this because this really matters. Inquiry learning doesn't mean open slather. The teachers that do well have 4 key structures in place, and I want to walk you through each one of those. Number 1 is a clear entry point. Every inquiry lesson needs a clear beginning, a provocation, something that sparks their thinking, whether it's an object, an image, a question on the board, a story, or a simple hands-on task. Children need to know what they're looking at, what they'll be doing, and what you expect of them in that first 5 minutes. A clear entry point sets the tone for everything that follows. The second structure point you need is to define the roles and the norms. Before you even begin, children need to know what inquiry looks like and sounds like in your room. What does it sound like when they're thinking and talking together? What do you do when you disagree? What happens when you're stuck? Just like any other well-structured, explicit instruction lesson, you need to be explicit about your expectations and the norms around inquiry lessons. And once children know them, they largely police themselves. Structure number 3. You need a visible thinking framework. And this is a big one. When children are exploring or investigating, they need a scaffold, something that holds their thinking in place. It might be something as simple as a recording sheet with I notice, I wonder, I think. It might be a diagram, it might be a question map, or a group discussion framework like a think, pair, share. But the framework keeps the children anchored. It also gives you something to assess and a structure for you. I'll leave a link for you in the show notes or the description of some of the graphic organizers in my resource library that you might find valuable for this. Structure 4 is you need a strong close. Every inquiry lesson needs to come back together. This is where you, as the teacher, do some of your most important work. You draw those threads together. You name what you discovered. You connect it to the learning intention. Children need that landing, and honestly, so do you. It's where you can see that they've actually understood, where you can correct any misunderstandings or misconceptions, and where you can celebrate the thinking that happened. With those 4 structures in place, inquiry learning doesn't feel like a tightrope. It doesn't feel like chaos. It feels like a really good lesson. Now, I want to say this clearly. You do not need to overhaul everything you do. If the idea of a full inquiry unit feels overwhelming to you, start with 5 minutes. 5 minutes at the beginning of a science lesson, where you put something on the table and you ask, what do you notice? Before you teach anything. Or 5 minutes at the end of a maths lesson, where you're just asking, did anything surprise you today? Does it always work out? Can you think of a time it might not work out? Or just 5 minutes of wonder time, a weekly time slot where children can write or draw something that they're curious about with no pressure to find the answer on that day. And I've spoken about this on other episodes where we can use those wonder questions, and I'll link for you in the show notes episodes where we spoke about what you can do with those wonder questions. Inquiry is a muscle for you and for your students. And like any other muscle, it gets stronger the more you use it. But you don't build a strong muscle by lifting the heaviest weight you possibly can on day 1. You start small. You notice what happens and you build from there. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, I want to try this, but I need something to get my hands on to get started, well, I've got several resources for you. I leave links to them all to help you get started straight away in the show notes and the episode description. They're all tried and tested, and they work brilliantly with K to 2, even 3 kids. Listen, if this episode resonated with you today, I'd love you to share it with a colleague, a teacher, or a parent who's curious about inquiry learning but hasn't quite taken the step. Sometimes all it takes is hearing someone say, the fear is normal and here's what to do with it. Thanks so much for spending time with me here today. And like always, take care of yourself and be blooming curious.